Okay, welcome everyone who is joining us so far, and those of you who are just now coming into the webinar room, welcome. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Kelly Graham with University Conference Services. We're thrilled to partner with Innovative RX Strategies today. Greg Mattson and Michael Staub are going to share with us their wealth of information and knowledge on how to get free drugs. I'm just kidding. Free specialty drugs, fact or fiction. Just a couple of housekeeping items first to run through. We do recommend listening to the webinar through your computer speakers. If you need to call in, the phone number is in the Q&A pane. Use that question and answer pane there on the right-hand side of your screen to send in questions or comments to Michael and Greg. Your questions are private, so no one else will be able to see what you write in, and they will get to as many questions as they can throughout the webinar and at the end if there's time, or certainly they'll follow up with you after. Today's session is being recorded, so tomorrow in your email, you will receive an email from University Conference Services with a link to the recording and all of the HRCI, SHRM, and CPE for CPAs credit information. So that'll come in your email tomorrow. And with that, without further ado, I think Michael and Greg, you can take it away.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, this is Michael Saab. I am one of the co-CEOs of Innovative RX Strategies, and Greg and I were actually supposed to do this presentation in Orlando at the UCS conference that was supposed to take place this week, but unfortunately because of the coronavirus and the canceling of the conference in Orlando, we're doing this by webinar instead. So we appreciate you joining us and listening to what we have to say about free specialty drugs, fact or fiction, because we know this is something that keeps coming up quite a bit with our clients, whether it be a commercial client or with our TPA clients or coalitions. So we just wanted to kind of talk through some of the things that we're seeing and trying to kind of set the record straight and whether or not there's such a thing as free specialty drugs. But before we get started, a little bit about myself. Prior to starting Innovative RX Strategies with Greg, I was the Vice President of Legal Services and Managing Counsel for CVS Caremark and ran their legal department in Northbrook, as well as had attorneys I was responsible for in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Irving, Texas. So by trade, I am a healthcare attorney, so several of these things that we'll be talking about today are near and dear to my heart as it relates to healthcare law, because I think sometimes what happens is that sometimes people forget that we are in a healthcare industry and that there are certain laws that do apply to what we do, whether as clients, consultants, PBMs, or whatever. So that's sort of the perspective that I come from, and I'll let Greg tell a little bit about himself.
Good afternoon. I'm Greg Mattson. So I'm the other co-founder of Innovative RX Strategies. I'm a pharmacist. I've kind of been in the PBM industry really since 1990, so a long time ago. Prior to that, I was a Walgreens pharmacist for a number of years. So, but prior to Michael and I started Innovative RX Strategies, I was the Senior Vice President of Retail Services at CVS Caremark. So I kind of held all the retail pharmacy contracts. I set up the networks. I managed the generic MAC pricing. I really had a $26 billion P&L. I really managed the spread for Caremark and made their margins, sat on the underwriting calls, kind of decide what kind of profitability we're going to make on clients. So I have a pretty good idea how PBMs make money and how their systems work. And so that's why Michael and I kind of came together, 12 years ago or so to create Innovative RX Strategies to come on your side of the table to help employers and our clients kind of understand what they're buying when they go out and contract with a PBM, or to kind of sift through to see, if someone's offering you free specialty drugs, what does that really mean? And so hopefully today we can explain a little of that for you.
Before we get started, one of the things we wanted to start off with a poll question. Kelly, if you can kind of pull that up on the poll question, the first one. So the first poll question is, have you been approached about the idea of getting free specialty drugs from anybody? It could be a non-PBM that has sort of a program that promotes or tries to sell the idea of a free specialty drug. There's some PBMs that have some international programs that they try to promote or make available, as they say, to clients. So we're just kind of wanted to see how many have been approached about the idea of getting free specialty drugs. Wow.
Not many.
Not
None.
many. Well,
that's interesting.
Yeah. Well, the reason we wanted to do this is because our experience has been the other side, that we probably get at least a call or two a week with somebody saying, hey, I got promoted or asked by somebody about these free specialty drugs, or that there are free specialty drugs available. So, and a lot of that is because, as the first slide that we go to is really because of the growth of specialty drugs. So, I think that, as most of you are probably aware, specialty drugs are now increasing to almost 12% of the overall, or the cost of specialty drugs have gone up almost 12% in 2020, and they're now starting to equal about 50% of an employer's drug spend. In fact, we've had some annual reviews this year with clients where they've been as high as 55% of their overall drug spend has been in the area of specialty drugs, which equates to about 1 to 2% of claims. And so what that causes is because most employers and a lot of TPAs and coalitions and small employers are saying, well, how do I get my arms and my hands around the cost of these specialty drugs, and what can I do to lower my costs? Because right now, outside of or previously or the last several years, outside of having an AWP discount and a rebate for a specialty drug, it's not really helped employers as much as they would like in terms of lowering their costs. So one of the things that people have been looking at, of course, are specially manufactured coupons, and what is the availability of a specially manufactured coupon on specialty drugs are taken by your members. For example, Humira, which is probably one of your most widely used specialty drugs, there is a specially manufactured coupon for Humira. And they're probably, in fact, today there are probably more than 85 specialty drugs that have, coupons that are available. It seems like every day there's a new specialty drug that comes out that has a manufactured coupon. And in fact, a lot of the commercials you see on television these days are specialty drugs, where they're trying to promote the use of those particular specialty drugs, particularly if you have rheumatoid arthritis and you're taking Cosentyx or one of these other types of drugs are being promoted. And when they talk about zero copay or a coupon card, that's a manufactured coupon. That's the kind of program that pharma has developed that we'll talk about to kind of help defray the cost of these specialty drugs. And pharma's been doing this for quite a while, for several years now, in terms of either by offering coupons, or they also have created charitable foundations to try to allow people access, or patients access to some of these specialty drugs to help defray the cost, which is really or intended to reduce or eliminate their out-of-pocket expenses that they may have for a particular specialty drug. And I think that part of the problem, I think, with a lot of these programs is, whether it's particularly the charitable foundations or the patients assistance programs through these foundations, have really come under a lot of scrutiny over the last 6 to 9 months to a year. And in fact, there have been at least 4 different settlements between the Office of Inspector General, which is part of the Department of Health and Human Services, with 4 different foundations, multi-million-dollar settlements, because the OIG has considered, as it relates to Medicare patients in the Medicare program and Medicaid, but primarily to Medicare, that these patients assistance programs and these dollars are being used by pharma to get people on their drugs are really kickbacks. And so I know that the Senate is giving this area a lot more scrutiny in terms of saying, hey, look, that some of these programs should not be tied to income. There's some of these other requirements that these foundations have that need to be looked at. And so I think that, either these programs are going to have to change somewhat, or they're going to continue to face legal scrutiny. And the only reason I bring this up, because while it applies to Medicare, the reality is every state has some form of an anti-kickback statute. And so once the federal government starts looking at this, it's not too long before states' attorney generals or health commissioners in different states start looking at the same thing and saying, okay, what's going on here, and who's actually benefiting from these programs, and is it really increasing the cost of the specialty drug? So that's kind of what we wanted to talk about today. Next slide is on the history of the patients assistance programs. A lot of these were, again, developed in the 1990s. I know when Greg and I were at Caremark, Caremark had a program if you had hemophilia, and you had to go in front of a committee, and there was a way to try to provide prescriptions or high-cost specialty drugs to members who could not afford that. And so a lot of these kind of developed initially around Hep C and rheumatoid arthritis and hemophilia and different type of cancer drugs as a way to help clients or help members try to lower their drug costs as related to their copay and deductible. And initially, a lot of these patients assistance programs, when they were initially started, kind of were really kind of fell within the guidelines of the anti-kickback laws, but when Medicare Part D was passed in 2005, then things started changing a little bit. And quite frankly, pharma has used patients assistance programs and coupons as really a way of creating brand loyalty and developing a market for the drugs. It's interesting when we do annual reviews, you can see the impact of the TV commercials in the drugs that are from let's say 2018 to 2019, the drugs that members have taken are largely impacted because of commercials. And so I think that those are, that's what pharma's trying to do. They're trying to develop a brand loyalty and develop a market for their drugs. And so if they can get somebody to take that drug for a copay or for a $5 copay or whatever it may be, knowing that a lot of these people could be on high deductible health plans, they know that eventually that member, once they use that coupon, they're going to run through their out-of-pocket, and the employer is going to be picking up most of the cost, and Greg will talk about that in a little bit as well. So, the question is, do these types of programs really increase drug sales and prices and increase the cost? And there are a lot of arguments to indicate that they probably do. So, and Greg will talk now a little bit more in detail about some of these programs.
Yeah. So there is some confusion between patients assistance programs and drug manufacturer coupon programs, right? So I want to kind of clarify those things. So the patients assistance programs, they're really either drug manufacturer independent charities to really help patients with their out-of-pocket costs. So to afford the medication, and usually the assistance requires some sort of status, either income or medical necessity, health status. You gotta qualify to get patients assistance in a lot of cases, right? And the PBMs are aware of this assistance. So a lot of times the PBMs and their specialty pharmacies, they will help out the patients that need the assistance and work with them and get through it. Pharma, the drug manufacturers, they get federal tax deductions for participating in these patient assistance programs, these foundations, and providing funding to that, right, to help people cover the cost of their drugs. So, when you think about the spending of these top 10 pharma companies, right, in these patient assistance programs, they spend about $10 billion this year, really, on this whole thing. And the whole piece, right, so this is kind of this area where PBMs are saying, you know what, we can get you free specialty drugs, right? There's a plan to get you free specialty drugs, and they're really all centered around this patient assistance program, which we'll talk a little bit more about. The other piece, though, is manufacturer coupons, right? So as Michael mentioned, AbbVie, that makes Humira, offers a manufacturer coupon to help patients with their costs. They're primarily driven around specialty drugs, right? And they're really marketing dollars, as Michael mentioned, right? To help people get started on that therapy, to cover it. But the thing is, you got to be really careful with them, because usually there's monthly and annual limits for those coupons. So, you may get a coupon, but it may only cover you for a couple of months, and then you don't get a coupon anymore. So then by that time, though, you're on the drug. So it's pretty hard to take somebody off it once they get started on it, and who pays for it. All those kind of things I think you got to think about. And a lot of times the value of that coupon may actually exceed what the member's copay is. So we'll talk a little bit about some programs, a variable copay program that helps take advantage of that and helps lower than the employer's costs in addition to the member's copay. So let's talk a little bit more about the patient's assistance, right? So it is something that it allows you to distribute these prescription drugs through a 501c3 organization, right? So pharma's doing that. They got, 7 out of the 10, largest U.S. grant foundations are really, based on their giving, are coming out of the drug manufacturers doing this kind of stuff. But there are also a lot of independent charities and financial assistance. There's the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. There's the Hemophilia Foundation. There's foundations and stuff that do those kind of charitable work to help get medications to patients that just can't afford it without going through it. But it's interesting, I saw a statistic that really for every $1 million that the drug manufacturers, pharma, invests into the patients assistance programs, they get a $20 million return. It's a huge investment for them because once they get someone started on their drug, it's pretty hard to get them off it, right? They stay on it as long as they're still on it. And that's kind of the issues with regard to the Medicare and Medicaids is they help the Medicare people, the seniors, get on these medications, and then they stay on them, right? And eventually the government or somebody's funding all this because the people blow through their out-of-pockets. But typically, though, for these patients' assistance, right, the member's got to provide some sort of documentation to justify the need. They don't just get it free. There's got to be some justification. Usually, like I said, it's either financial or need-based. There's some need-based criteria that go along with these. And they do have these anti-kickback implications, which Michael was mentioning. So the Affordable Care Act, though, one of the things it did is that it kind of limited the amount of assistance that can be provided through these patients' assistance programs, the annual out-of-pockets. We had one of our clients had a member whose daughter had cystic fibrosis. And she was on Kalydeco, a drug for cystic fibrosis, which is $350,000 a year. But the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation was willing to offer $93,000 a year in assistance to help cover the cost of that drug. So what we were able to do prior to the Affordable Care Act being in place is that we put a copay on Kalydeco of $93,000. So essentially the foundation would fund that first $93,000 of that member's copay, and then the employer had to pick up the balance of the $350,000, but it at least allowed things to happen. But when the Affordable Care Act went into place, though, it capped members out of pockets at $6,000. So you could no longer take advantage of those things, which really kind of impacted some stuff going forward. But let's think about, this whole scheme about getting free specialty drugs. As I mentioned, it's kind of centered around this patient's assistance stuff. And what PBMs are telling some of our clients and prospective clients we've been talking to is that, well, just simply exclude these specialty drugs from your benefit. Don't cover specialty drugs, right? And so if you don't cover them across the board, right, first of all, your SBDs need to be updated, right, to actually reflect that you're not covering specialty drugs. And non-grandfathered plans got to comply with the Affordable Care Act. So that makes it kind of difficult for plans that are non-grandfathered because they still got to cover the drugs that are required on the Affordable Care Act aspect of it. But when the claim comes through in this, the excluded specialty drugs, the claim rejects. The specialty drug gets submitted by the pharmacy, and the claim rejects. It's NDC not covered. The drug's not covered. So then the PBM goes out to these foundations and tries to look for assistance, right? And it assumes that, right, that all these specialty drugs have some sort of specialty assistance, because not all of them do. And what happens if you're excluding all specialty drugs, but there's no copay, there's no assistance for that drug, right? That starts to get things kind of complicated. But a lot of cases, the PBMs that are proposing this scheme, right, say, well, we'll complete all the financial disclosures for you. We'll submit them into the drug manufacturers and get approval, right? But what happens if the patient actually makes too much money and they don't qualify for the need-based services of this? There's just some issues going on with this stuff, right? But if the foundation does actually agree, specialty drug is going to be covered, they're going to provide the drug to the member at no cost, right? Because they qualify under the foundation. Well, then the PBM, right, that's doing this kind of legwork for the employer says, you know what, we get 20% of the savings, though, right? That's kind of their fee for doing this service to get the free specialty drugs. But it's 20% of what? What are they actually charging you 20% of? Full AWP, the full cost of that specialty drug? Or is it GoodRx's pricing that they publish out on the internet that you can go out and look up? It's 20% of what? That's not really ever very clear on kind of how all this stuff works. then really what happens though if the patient is denied or there's no assistance for that drug at all, right? Does the PBM just kind of wink wink and provide an override that allows that drug to process so the member can get it? Most likely that's what's going to happen. But the problem is, what discount do they get on that drug? And what copay gets applied? Remember, specialty drugs aren't covered. So what kind of discount are they going to pay? You, the employer, what are you going to pay for that? And what kind of copay gets assigned to it, right? And remember, since the specialty drugs are not covered, there's no rebates on these drugs, right? Because they're not covered under the plan, so you don't get any rebates on it. So that's just some of the challenges of this proposed scheme. So I've kind of put together kind of a quick example of kind of how this whole thing works though. So let's say the specialty drugs got a $6,000 average wholesale price, AWP for it. The specialty pharmacy, you get a discount of AWP minus 18% on it, so or $44,920. You know, there's a specialty manufacturer rebate, drug rebate of $1,500, a manufacturer coupon of $1,000. So that's all kind of really good, right? That all stuff that apply. But the foundation says, you know what? If you're not covering these drugs at all, you don't get a rebate, you don't get a manufacturer coupon, it's not covered, right? It's $6,000, but the foundation agrees to provide it to the patient at zero cost, right? They qualify, they meet the criteria, and the foundation says, we're going to provide you with the drug at zero cost. So then the plan gets charged, you the employer, right, 20%, but 20% of what? Full AWP, $1,200 it costs you. Granted, that's less than what it would cost if you actually had to go through and you know, pay for it, because otherwise it would be like $2,420 that it would cost you with the rebate and the manufacturer coupon. So $1,200 is a pretty good deal, right? But that's kind of how these specialty things work. But again, it's tricky because, again, what happens if the patient doesn't qualify? What happens if there's no assistance on that drug? Right? Then you get no rebate, you get no manufacturer coupon, and your cost is really $6,000 on this.
Yeah, and there's a couple I wanted to make on this right here is one of the key things, one of the questions that they ask on some of these specialty assistance program applications is, do you have insurance? And that's why, you know, PBMs are telling employers not to cover specialty drugs. They want to say, well, no, I don't have insurance for that specialty drug, even though you do have insurance for retail and mail coverage. And pharma is getting a little smarter about that particular question, because they understand that some of the games are getting played as it relates to the quote-unquote no insurance, because the reality is they do have insurance for other drugs. So they're now changing their application to say, well, do you have, if you say, do you have insurance, and say no, or do you have insurance to cover retail and mail, then you have to answer yes. So that gets a little tricky in terms of you know, how do you answer the no insurance question. The other thing I wanted to point out is some of these foundation programs, and you know, you really have to read the fine print, because what happens is they you know, there's one that Greg and I found is for Copay, which is for kind of blood disorder, but it's a specialty drug, and they say, oh, it's like $0 copay, sign up for this, blah blah blah. But then if you look at the fine print, it says the amount of the copay assistance program will not exceed $11,977 per month and $25,000 per year. Limit 1 30-day supply per 30 days. Patients will be responsible for any out-of-pocket costs above the maximum annual and monthly program benefit. So and this is pretty typical, and this kind of goes to the point that yes, you may on maybe the first 2 or 3 fills where the member is getting it for free, but after the beginning the 3rd fill or the 4th fill, who's going to pay that? And that's part of what the problem why the OIG says, well, wait a second, you know, these are really kind of kickbacks, because you're getting me on this drug and you're paying me to get on it, but then I'm on it and there's no other advantage. And so I don't look at other, you know, once I'm on it, I'm not likely to change, and that's been the concern with the OIG. So you just have to, you know, on any of these programs, you have to really understand what's in the fine print. You know, because a lot of these programs do not cover a drug for 12 months, you know, and this is pretty typical in terms of language that you see, and it's always the fine print that will get you. So. Next slide. So the other thing is why do you need to pay somebody to do this? And again, I know that some of the other UCS conferences, when we've talked about this issue, people have come up to me and said, well, what's that link you're talking about? So I'm actually giving you the 3 links that are right here. But quite frankly, there is really no reason to pay anybody to go out and do this type of a program for you in terms of paying 20 to 25%, because what they're doing, and these are 3 of them, but there's a lot of different websites you can go to that list every coupon that's available or every patient assistance program that is out there. And it's interesting. You should just go on and click on one of these links sometime and just kind of play with it, and you can put in different dollar amounts, whether you have insurance, and get an idea about how much that foundation and or pharmaceutical manufacturer will pay for a particular drug. And so one of the things we have been trying to push over the last year or two is really, as a part of the specialty services that a PBM provides, is to actually have them work with a client, whether it be a commercial client, whether it be with a TPA or a coalition, to say, hey, look, part of the services you should provide is to really help our member or assist our members in getting any kind of copay assistance dollars that are out there through these foundations. And I think if you don't ask the PBM, they're never going to do it. So I think that if you should ask them to as a part of their services, to help your members through this process. If they don't, there are some employers, because a lot of you're going to cover specialty drugs no matter what. You're not going to exclude them from coverage. But the question is if you have a high deductible health plan and you do have a member that is financially challenged in getting a particular drug, even though they may not meet the 400% below the federal poverty limit threshold that most of these foundations have, there still could be money available for them for these specialty drugs. So I think that if you have members, if you have high deductible health plans for your members, it's something to consider trying to help them with. If you don't, if you're on kind of a you don't have a high deductible health plan, it's a little harder to do, but there's still dollars available, and sometimes it's just good to look at this to see what's out there for help. But these are just 3, and there's a bunch more I can give you, but these are 3 really good organizations that can kind of help you, give you an idea about what money is available for a particular drug. All you have to do is just type in the drug and you'll get there. Next slide. Okay, Greg mentioned a little bit about manufacturer coupon programs. These are probably the more common ones that you may be taking advantage of, and we'll find out as we go through this presentation. But these are manufacturer coupons that really are offered on specialty drugs. We've talked about Humira, there's Enbrel, there's all these Cosentyx, there's all these different specialty drugs that have manufactured coupons that are available to them. And as we talked about, these are their marketing dollars are spent by pharma to try to get people on their medications to start taking those. And again, there are limits, again, on monthly or annual limits to the coupon, whether it's Humira or some of these others. But that, so again, it's important to understand about, as a part of these manufactured coupons are available, what is the value and how long will they continue to pay that coupon for during a particular plan year. And basically, if pharma, part of the reason they want to have these coupons is they know that if there's an employer and there's an out-of-pocket, which they know there is because of the Affordable Care Act or a high deductible health plan, that employer is eventually going to have to pick up the tab for their drug, and they know that. So that's why these coupons, sometimes how do you take advantage of that coupon and the excess of the coupon above and beyond the member's copay to help you lower your drug costs, and Greg will talk about that now. Next slide.
So when we think about these specially manufactured coupons, right, so it does impact these high deductible health plans, right? That's one thing that, when you got a $2,000, $3,000 front-end deductible on these high deductible health plans, right, it helps cover that cost to get the member started on it and kind of get them through it. The problem is, right, is that historically, right, these things, if members got a $2,000 front-end deductible and they can get a coupon that covers their $2,000, they've essentially met their deductible, right? They blow right through it. They hit their deductible, and now the plan picks up the cost of this whole thing. So these things were really designed, right, to help that member initially cover that expensive drug. The coupons really have no financial requirements associated with them, right? There aren't any requirements like there are in the patient's assistance programs. But the problem is it does allow the member to meet that deductible or hit their out-of-pocket maximums right away. The drug manufacturers know that. If I give them this coupon to get them through that first front end of this high deductible piece, right, then the employer picks it up, the member's good to go, and we'll cover their costs. So, but one thing though, these coupons, they can't be used in conjunction with any federal programs such as Med D or any of that kind of stuff, right? You got to be pretty careful about how that kind of stuff works. So, there are some levels, though, of things that PBMs can do to help with these specially manufactured coupons, right? So one of the things is called an out-of-pocket protection. And what the out-of-pocket protection essentially does is says, we're only going to give the member credit for the amount that they actually paid for the drug, right? So that's one of the pieces. Then there's a variable copay program, which I'll go in more detail on these three here, at least the out-of-pocket and variable copay. But the variable copay program essentially says, okay, if the member's got a $100 specialty copay, but the coupon is worth $1,000, how do I get access to that extra $900? And that's really what this manufactured coupon program or copay program, variable copay program is about. And then there are some PBMs that offer kind of this extended coupon where they have they partner with a third-party vendor that goes out and kind of sifts through and finds all the different coupons that are available from all kinds of things. But those third-party vendors then get a percentage of the savings, right? They get paid a fee for this kind of service. So that's something just kind of to think about. Let's talk a little bit more about this out-of-pocket protection, right? So, the members got that, like I said, this front-end deductible, $2,000 front-end deductible. The out-of-pocket protection, after the fact, after the claim comes through and you analyze how much did the member actually pay for the medication, their out-of-pocket gets adjusted by the PBM after the claim adjudicates to only reflect what they've actually paid. So in Humira, example that we talk about, it's got a $1,000 manufacturer coupon associated, but they require the member to pay $5. So instead of the member having $1,000 or $100 right copay, they only actually pay $5 for it. Or if they have a $1,000 front-end deductible, they only actually pay $5 for it. So their out-of-pocket gets adjusted to only reflect that $5, right? So that helps minimize how quickly they blow through their front-end deductible or their out-of-pocket accumulators, and meet those things. But one of the key things in these out-of-pockets is that the member's got to be notified in your SPD that they're only going to get credit for what they actually paid. Not what the value of the coupon was, but what their actual out-of-pocket was, right? That's something that's really important. You got to make sure that the SPD reflects that, so they're aware of that when it comes up front. The other program that we want to talk more about is really this variable copay program, right? And the variable copay program, in addition to kind of this out-of-pocket, but what a variable copay program really does, like I said before, is it kind of maximizes the value of that manufacturer coupon. So I keep using Humira as an example, right? So you got a $1,000 front-end deductible, a $1,000 copay, or excuse me, $1,000 coupon a month that Humira is willing to offer. And if the member's got a $100 copay, right, that's for a specialty drug, what the PBM will actually do with this is they'll take that $100 and they'll vary it. They'll increase it to $1,000. So kind of behind the scenes to the member doesn't really understand what's going on, but they'll increase the copay to $1,000 from $100 to $1,000 to take full advantage of that coupon. Otherwise, right, the coupon would only cover the $100 copay the member had. They have to pay $5 for it, and there's $900 that still gets left on the table. So the variable copay program increases that to take full advantage of that, the full dollar amount of the manufacturer coupon that gets applied. the balance gets adjusted in the system, you know, and the challenge is some of the PBMs that do this, since it's really a copay that's getting modified, not really the ingredient cost, but some PBMs actually go in and take the value of these manufacturer coupons and they reduce the value of the ingredient cost in the system by the value of that coupon. So then you get really deceptive numbers, and that's something that we, you know, on the annual audits that I do for all of our clients on a pricing audit, I go in and make sure that I validate that what they're actually getting for their discounts and that it's not inflated. You know, when I see specialty claims coming through at average wholesale price AWP minus 35% or 41%, I know that's got the value of that manufacturer coupon embedded in the ingredient cost, which doesn't really reflect what they truly paid for it, right? Because that coupon could be applied, you know, from any PBM. So that's just one thing that you got to kind of be careful of, that they don't deduct it out of the ingredient cost to give you an artificial discount that's not really true of what they're actually paying the pharmacies. But it does get adjusted. But again, that SPD has to be modified, right, to actually reflect that, so that the member knows that this variable copay has been put in place. So let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. So here was that same specialty drug, right, had a contracted discount of minus 18 of $49.20. The member's specialty copay is $100, right, but the coupon is worth $1,000. So instead of just having that coupon cover the member's $100 thing, right, the variable copay program increases that copay to $1,000 to take full advantage of the coupon that the manufacturer is willing to contribute. Now, and if this is Humira, the member's got to pay $5 for it, which is all that would be reflected in their out-of-pocket, and in their accumulators would be $5 for that. But the ingredient cost to you, the employer, then becomes, right, the ingredient cost minus the coupon, $1,000, minus the rebate, because it's still rebate eligible. So you really only paid $2,420 for this drug, right, through this whole variable copay program. So it's really a slick way to take full advantage of the coupons that manufacturers are offering. Now, most PBMs have the ability to offer these kind of programs, this variable copay program. So I think we got a polling question here to see if people are taking advantage of these.
So the polling question is, are you taking advantage of the different variable copay programs that use a specially manufactured coupon to lower your specialty drug costs?
So looks like a few of you are, yeah. But there's a lot of you out there, though, that are still leaving a tremendous amount of money then on the table. The drug manufacturers are offering these programs, the coupons, to help lower costs, and so I encourage you to work with your PBM that you have in place to take advantage of these copay programs, these variable copay programs that are in place.
Yeah, and it's really important, based upon these results, it's really important for you to look at your annual review to see, particularly on your specialty drug costs. We actually did this for one of our clients, large clients in Chicago, and it was stunning. And when, you know, before we put this program in, it was a great, like 80-some%. You know,
Right.
the overall costs were impacted, or a lot of their costs were impacted because of the coupons, because members that had high deductible health plans were just running through that. And so that meant that they were paying a lot more. So I think that you should have most of you should have your 2019 annual reviews for your PBM. And you really should be going through that with a fine-tooth comb to figure out, you know, where are there opportunities in terms of these copay or the manufactured coupons, variable copay programs, and really sitting down with your PBM to try to work through how you can take advantage of that to lower your spend, because it's free money, and as Greg said, you're leaving money on the table on these types of programs. And the other thing I wanted to pick up just what Greg was saying about how there are some PBMs, and again, it's important for you to look at your annual review and look at the discounts of what they're reporting. And sometimes it has a tendency to be some of the smaller boutique-sized PBMs that do this, but it is using the manufactured coupon and overinflating the value of the discount that they're actually giving you. Again, and if you think about your contract, you know, especially there's an AWP minus discount, and you need to make sure there's language in your contract that says that any specialty coupons will be excluded from that discount, and it should be anyway, because that's what there is an AWP minus percentage, and that's what you're supposed to pay, and even if they're doing it on a quote-unquote pass-through basis, it's specialty. I mean, you have to understand, what is the AWP discount that I'm actually paying you, and what are you doing with that coupon? Because if they're taking advantage of the coupon, in terms of the quote-unquote the discount, then, again, you're still paying more, potentially more for the cost of that specialty drug. So it's really important to look at that, not only from a contractual standpoint, but also from a cost standpoint in terms of what's actually going on. So there are a lot of games that get played, and again, that, specialty drugs are expensive. We get that. And as Greg said, if somebody starts showing you an AWP discount of, 30-some %, you got to really question it, because, quite frankly, the hospital class of trade isn't anywhere near that, and that's usually one of the better discounts that's available outside of Medicare and Medicaid. So it's just something to really question when you see these high specialty discounts.
Yeah, we had one of our clients when we were doing the audits for them, their specialty discounts were around AWP minus 11%. Versus 18 or so that we typically see on these brand name drugs, and it's because they were throwing these coupons into the discount, and then which artificially inflated the discount that they were actually receiving. So you just got to be really careful, like Michael said, and kind of make sure that that your PBM is being on the up and up when they show you what their discounts are on these specialty drugs.
Yeah. Okay, the last portion of the presentation we want to spend the next several minutes talking about is importation of prescription drugs, and this is another area, I think, in the last year or so where we've seen a lot of activity among not only some PBMs but also non-PBMs are out there that are selling a business model about low cost, or not free, but really cheap specialty drugs and lower than what you can pay, and a lot of these kind of revolve around importation of specialty drugs, or prescription drugs overall, but primarily on the specialty side. And I think this is something that you just need to kind of think through what this means, because there are a lot of different things I think that people don't consider when they are thinking about these importation of specialty drug programs that are being thrown about. And part of it, I think, is what we have seen, unfortunately, is a lot of some PBMs who have really kind of focused more on the brokers. And sometimes, unfortunately, brokers don't really understand, what the marketing that they're being sold in terms of a program. They just hear cheap, lower. My client pays a lot in specialty drugs, and oh, by the way, I'm going to make money from this program because this whoever is promoting this drug importation program is going to pay me something if I implement this program, which, in my opinion, is another whole kickback issue as it relates to the relationship between PBMs, non-PBMs, and some brokers in terms of what they're promoting. Because, as Greg will go through at the end of this section, it is not always cheaper for you to import specialty drugs, despite what somebody may tell you. So it kind of comes under the adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so that's why it's really important. But the reality is that prescription drugs are heavily regulated in the United States by the FDA. In fact, this last week there was a big issue about the hydrochloroquine that apparently the FDA or somebody was importing from Pakistan and India, which had come from non-FDA approved facilities. As most of you may not know, is that any generic drug or any drug that's manufactured outside of the United States has to be approved by the FDA. That manufacturing facility in a foreign country has to be FDA approved, and if it's not, those drugs typically do not come into the country. But again, specialty drugs, I mean, the reality is people, states, Florida and other states have certainly promoted the idea of we want to import specialty drugs or drugs because it's cheaper to bring drugs from Canada than it is from buying them in the United States. And a lot of that is because the countries that have these lower brand drug costs are socialist so they have socialist medicine. You know, they have as a part of the cost that they negotiate. For example, I mean, Canada negotiates for 33 million citizens, and their rebates and that they negotiate with pharmaceutical manufacturers are factored into the discounts and the costs that they pay. But it's the Canadian government that's actually buying those prescription drugs, which are then dispensed by the pharmacies. You know, in this country, it's a little bit different, you know, method in terms of how we do things. But whether it's Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, Ireland, you know, all these countries have social medicine in terms of their structure. So yes, it looks cheaper, and that's why, you know, people would go to Canada go from Vermont to Canada to get their insulins. But by and large, the federal law still prohibits the importation of prescription drugs into the United States. And I know that Canada and other countries have said, hey, look, you know, these states that want to have these importation, we're going to allow importation of drugs. Canada basically said, no, you're not. We need to, you know, we can't supply brand drugs to our own population and also have these open programs where Americans, whether, you know, we're in a highly populated state, are going to then start trying to get the drugs from Canada, because they're going to run out, and pharma is basically not going to allow that to happen anyway, because you know, they just are not going to allow their products to be re-imported back into the United States, because it will impact their ability to sell drugs in this country. And the Drug Supply Chain Act of 2015 requires that all healthcare entities that distribute, dispense, and administer prescription drugs to purchase special drugs only from authorized licensed trading partners in this country, which is pharma wholesalers and you know, the pharmacy, the dispenser itself. And that's important, because what the FDA is concerned about, and what they've expressed in a warning that they issued to consumers that were using CannaRx, is nobody could validate the pedigree, because in the United States, there's an NDC code that's associated with each drug that's dispensed in this country. There is not an NDC code on these other drugs that come from a foreign country. They're just not. It's a unique identifier for an American drug, or for drugs that are dispensed in this country. And the FDA has been concerned about the pedigree of the prescription drugs coming from Canada or the United Kingdom or other countries, because there's no way to validate where that drug came from. And yes, there's a certain amount of quote-unquote, air quotes, faith that people have that the drug they're getting from Canada is the same as they would buy in the United States, or if it's coming from the UK or Australia or someplace. But that's not always the case. And in fact, there was an article that came out last month that said that this year, the FDA has stepped up seizures of imported drugs from Canada and other countries, because they're concerned about the drugs that are coming into this country, and the fact that nobody can really validate that these drugs are really what they say they are. And so, you know, people unfortunately have paid a lot of money for importing a drug from another country, and the way it usually works is some organization that you contract with to import the drug will send the prescription that's written by an American doctor to a doctor in another country, who will then rewrite that prescription in that particular country before they send the drug to the member. And one of the things Greg will talk about later is the concerns from a clinical standpoint in terms of the drug utilization review that's not necessarily being done on some of these drugs, and the interaction it could have with a drug that a member is taking. So that, you know, the question is, you know, what is being done in terms of making sure that you're not going to have a drug-to-drug interaction, or what happens if this member takes a drug that that they have a bad reaction to, and and if, even though it's being imported and you're being charged a percent, you know, what if they stop taking that drug, or for whatever reason? So, having said that, there are exceptions, you know, to importation of prescription drugs. The FDA, clearly, there is what's called the personal use exemption under federal law, that if you, as an individual, want to go to Canada or Mexico or another country to buy a prescription drug, you can, as long as for your own personal use. And I know, you know, there are some states like Utah which have promoted a program where their members could go to Mexico and they would pay, to go. Well, now you've got a pandemic, and so the question is, if you're a member that's on a specialty drug and you can't get that drug, what does the state of Utah do now about funding specialty drugs that, for people who can't go across the border because of the coronavirus? So, so you have it, or if somebody has been going on medical tourism and trying to go for a specialty drug, and now you can't leave, or that country won't let you in. So there are situations that are currently existing that impact a member's health, which could impact the member's medical, which could impact your finances. So those are things that you have to kind of think about in terms of this, personal use or what it means. The interesting thing, though, is under the personal use exemption, it says, under the law, it says it only allows for the importation of a drug for a serious condition for which effective treatment may not be available domestically, either through commercial or clinical means in the U.S. The reality is that there is not a specialty drug that's not available in the United States, for that you can't get here to treat any kind of different condition that somebody has. So, but again, I think that by and large, I think that the federal government has said, okay, fine, if you're going to do it for your own personal use and you want to go across the border and pay for it, that's fine. The real question, though, is again, there are some PBMs and there are non-PBM companies that actually promote these importation programs. For example, they may say, well, we'll make the program available to the client. The question I've asked, the PBMs who push drug importation and non-PBM companies that push these programs to brokers and clients, I say, okay, well, are you willing to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the employer or the payer if they're willing to, utilize your program to import these specialty drugs? And the answer is always no. So and which always from a legal standpoint would concern me, because as an employer, if you are making this program available to your members, I think you expose yourself to liability, because if something goes wrong and you're doing it because it lowers your costs, there's some plaintiff's lawyer is going to be able to make a case against the employer about my client suffered either died or had some kind of bad outcome because of a particular specialty drug that was imported from Canada or Mexico or wherever it is, and you promoted this program, you made it available to them, and we're promoting it, and at the end of the day, you're going to be on the hook, because the PBM or the non-PBM promoting this is not going to agree to defend, indemnify, or hold you harmless. It just won't, and that would give me pause for concern. The other question then is what happens if a member, and again, we have this bullet point here, and I will caveat this by saying the federal government has not really pushed this, but it is on the books, and it's just something that I think that people need to be aware of, is if and Greg kind of touched on this earlier, that if a member imports a particular drug and then they submit the claim for you for reimbursement, a paper claim for reimbursement, that raises the issue of whether or not the employer, the TPA coalition, whoever is paying this on a paper claim that's being, funding this, are they aiding and abetting, this particular activity? And so that there are criminal penalties, and I put that out there. Again, like I said, the government has not gone after anybody with this. So, but I just want to make people aware that there are potentially criminal issues, and if the FDA is enforcing where they're not allowing these imported drugs to go to their final destination, whoever paid for it from a member, I just think it's something to be concerned about. On the next slide, I think that the question is, are specialty drugs really cheaper? And I think that's intuitively, I think that what's happened is that people understand the fear that employers have about the high cost of specialty drugs and how it's impacting their benefit costs, and they know that. And so anything that they can do to market the idea that I can do this cheaper, I'm going to be able to save you a lot of money on your specialty drugs if you import these drugs, then what I'm going to do is as opposed to you paying the PBM, whatever the PBM that you have, I'm going to save you money on the drug spend, on the specialty drug costs, and I'm only going to charge you 25% of the savings. But as Greg pointed out on some of the the savings that some of these companies charge for patient assistance programs is like, what are they charging you 25% of what? What is the base that they're using to calculate that 25% of the savings? Are they using the full AWP? Or we've had some that we've a couple of these the non-PBM companies or organizations that push these drug importation programs. What they use is GoodRx, or they use somebody else to establish, because they can show the employer, oh, this is what it is on GoodRx. Well, GoodRx, and there's a coupon, but we'll give you the credit for the coupon that may be available. But the GoodRx, they're charging with if they're reporting the pharmacy's UNC, it's AWP plus. It's not an AWP minus discount; it's an AWP plus. So that's one thing you need to be aware of at the very beginning, is that the actual brand cost of that drug is going to be higher than what the straight AWP is of minus discount that you would have to pay, because that's what they do. That's what the retail pharmacy or the specialty pharmacy. That's what their markup is on for UNC for that particular specialty drug. And the other thing is when you import a particular specialty drug, there are no manufacturer specialty coupons or rebates that are paid by a PBM on these drugs. So I think that where you have now specialty rebates that are over $1,000 per claim, and they're going higher, and the specialty manufacturer discounts and the AWP discount, I think that you have to do the math. You really have to look and see, does this make sense to do this kind of drug importation program? Because if you look at your AWP discount, if you look at your specialty brand discount, you look up if there's manufacturer coupons available that you can take advantage of through the variable copay program that we talked about, is that going to cost you really less than if you're paying somebody 25% of the savings of a higher cost drug that they're importing? And I think the other thing that doesn't get talked about is that the importation, by doing this, it could impact your retail pricing and your mail pricing and also your rebates, because if the PBM that you currently have, once they start losing, specialty claims and things like that, it could have an impact on the pricing you're paying. So Greg is going to walk through the slide.
Let me give you an example of kind of what we're talking about here. So that same specialty drug that we've used all the time, right? $4,920. The specialty drug in Canada, though, say it's $3,000. Again, why is it $3,000 in Canada? Because Canada, the Canadian government, has negotiated drugs on behalf of its 33 million people. The discount and the rebates are baked into this $3,000. The pharmacies in Canada make no margin on brand name drugs, right? So the government provides it to them, and they get paid a flat dispensing fee, like $15, to dispense the drug. They don't make a margin on it like they do in the United States. So the drug in Canada, for example, if he's only making $15 on it, if he actually is buying this or getting this from the Canadian government for $2,500, and he sells it to you in the U.S., the Canadian pharmacy makes $500 on the deal, right? So if he can do this and facilitate it, take a Canadian drug, sell it into the United States, he makes a much bigger profit on that. So that's kind of the motivation for the Canadian pharmacies to sell those specialty drugs into the United States, because they make more money that way. But anyway, so let's think about that. So the member specialty copay is $100. It gets waived on importation, but there's a $1,000 manufacturer coupon of which that variable copay program that we talked about would get applied to, so the member's not paying their copay anyway, right? And the specialty drug's got a $1,500 rebate. So the PBM's charging 25% of that importation savings, which, so it's $4,920 minus $3,000 times 25%. So the PBM's going to charge you, the client, $480 for this service that they're providing here. So what's the net cost to you as the client, right? You got your imported cost. It's really $3,480. You got to pay $3,000 for the drug, plus $480 that you're paying the PBM for the savings that you're generating. So it's costing you $3,480 drugs. But if you actually got it through your benefit in the United States, right, it would be $4,920 less the $1,000 manufacturer coupon, less the $1,500 rebate, and your cost would be $2,420. So you'd actually save about $1,000 by not going through not importing that specialty drug, and actually going through the process of this whole thing. And that's the piece I think people don't really realize, is that the manufacturer coupons associated with it and the specialty rebates are pretty valuable. Kelly, can we do this last poll question before we run out of time?
So the poll question is, are you currently using or seriously considering using a program offered by a PBM or a non-PBM to import specialty drugs for your members?
Good.
Okay, well, about 10, a little bit less than 10% of you are, and some of you are considering. It's about 20. It's about 20% are either doing it or considering it. So hopefully we've given you something to think about regarding the importation. So Greg, do you want to do the final slide?
Yeah, so the key takeaways on this whole piece, right, of our presentation is that, the foundations and the charities can provide specialty drugs, right? They will provide it if people qualify. They can provide them at no cost to the members, right? And, you got to be challenged with this whole thing, because what happens if you exclude specialty drugs from your plan design? What happens to that? If the member has, if there's no coverage for the drug, if, they end up going to pay full cost for this thing and you get no rebates on it, right? There's just challenges of saying, well, exclude specialty drugs from the benefit. You got to be really careful about that. But if you do something like this, right, the SPD's got to be updated to reflect what's going on in the specialty drugs. If they're not covered, right, they got to make sure they do that. You got to make sure that if you're non-grandfathered plan, you still got to apply for the Affordable Care Act requirements. So, if the patient does qualify, how much they charge for a free specialty drug? How much are you, the plan, charge for that free specialty drug? That there are websites that Michael showed you that you can go out and actually do this work yourself. You need to pay somebody for their legwork when you could actually do that, or have your PBM help do that as well. But then what happens if the member doesn't qualify, right? How do they get that medication? How do they get it? What do they pay for it, right? There'll be no rebates associated with it. There'll be no manufacturer coupons associated with it. It's not covered, right? So there's just some challenges with that whole piece. Variable copay programs are something all of you should be doing. You should be working with your PBM to take advantage of that, to maximize the value of the coupons that manufacturers are offering to help lower costs, right? Those variable copay programs, if you're not doing it now, make sure you talk to your PBM and work with them on it. Rebates on specialty drugs are significant. They're way higher than just brand name rebates. So make sure you've worked with your PBM to make sure that you're extracting the whole value of those things. You may be getting, pass-through, 100% pass-through of your rebates that your PBM's telling you. Well, typically in those cases, they're working with an aggregator. They're using a bigger PBM, a Caremark, an ESI, Optum to actually get the rebates, and they get a fraction of those paid back to them, of which they're passing through 100%. But that's not really what the total value of those rebates are worth. So you just got to be really careful with that. And the whole thing, you got to, like Michael mentioned, you got to do the math, right? Free specialty drugs may actually end up costing you more money. If you import them, if you're getting them through manufacturers, they're not covered. What kind of discounts get applied? You just got to be careful about this whole thing, that the free specialty drug scenario doesn't actually cost you more money.
Well, I know we've all been over. We appreciate your time, and again, if you have any questions, feel free to email those to Kelly, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. But again, we thank you for your time.
Thanks,
everyone.
Gentlemen, for an awesome webinar. Thanks all for joining us today. Hope you have a great afternoon. Thanks again.